Hey guys, Golf Shirt Shooter here. I wanted to talk to you about another reloading tip, a case prep tip. In the previous video that I had posted I gave a tip on how I sort out 45 ACP small primer pockets from large primer pockets. In the video I mentioned that I case gauge all of my brass prior to reloading it. And in order to do that, obviously you have to resize it. In the video, I mentioned that I resize and deprime all of my brass prior to reloading it. I resize it, deprime it, check it, case gauge it, and then I store it in buckets. And then when I'm ready to reload, I have a bunch of brass that, as far as I'm concerned, is as good as buying brand new brass in a bag at the local gun store or Sportsman's Warehouse or Cabela's or wherever, online. All of my cases I know are checked and ready to go. In the video, in the 45 ACP video, I mentioned a couple reasons I do that. Number one, I wet tumble all of my brass in stainless media. I like to get the inside of the cases and the primer pockets perfectly clean. I realize that you don't have to do that in order to reload quality cartridges. I used to clean all of my brass in walnut media, and then I would polish it in corn. I would do that before I resized and deprimed so that I wouldn't get media stuck in the primer pockets. And I cleaned tens of thousands of cases that way before I started wet tumbling. However, after I would dry tumble cases, I would resize and deprime because I was interested in case gauging all of my empty brass. In the video, in the 45 ACP video, I talked about why it's important for me to, anytime I can incorporate tooling into my process, I find that I get a better product, I get better quality results for the end product with tooling. It does help to eliminate a lot of the human element and the mistakes that we can make, because a lot of us aren't perfect. I'm certainly not. So a case gauge for me is a tool to check not just completed cartridges, but also the brass prior to reloading it. A lot of folks I've talked to reloading early on, when I started reloading about 7 years ago, I asked them, we got in the conversation about, the number of defective rounds that they make. I think we all know it's important to case gauge your completed cartridges, and you do that for a number of reasons. You want to make sure it chambers, but really you're making sure that the round is good, right? And so that led to the conversation of, hey, how many defective rounds have you found? And a lot of guys I've talked to, they find, many of them, 3% to 5% of defective rounds. And when you're talking about making 1,000 rounds of reloads, you're talking about 30 to 50 rounds. Some I've even talked to are in the 8% category, and I just kind of scratched my head and said, man, there's got to be a better way. I don't really want to make 1,000 rounds and have between 30 and 80 rounds that won't case gauge, because I'm not going to shoot them. So from day one, regardless of how I clean my brass, I resize and deprime them, and it's because I want to case gauge them. And what I'm looking for here is, I'm looking for good cases. I'm looking for bad cases. I'm trying to make sure that I don't load a case that ultimately will result in a bad cartridge. So if I can reduce the number of defected cartridges that I have reloaded, hey, I'm interested in that. I'll tell you that my success rate, my number of defects whenever I go through a reloading session is about 2 or 3 rounds per every 1,000. I think that's pretty good. I've gone as high as 5 or 6, but even then, I think that's pretty good. We're talking less than 1% of defective rounds, and that's less material that I'm wasting. I don't reload pulled bullets. I have a bullet puller, but I just won't reload them, and that's a preference of mine. Again, you may have a different preference, and that's certainly acceptable, but it's just something that I won't do. I don't reload pulled bullets. So if I make a If I make a completed cartridge and it doesn't case gauge, it goes into a bad ammo bucket, as I call it, and I won't shoot it. So I just wanted to kind of demonstrate for you, because I just came across this here a little bit ago. These are 10 millimeter cases. I've resized and I've deprimed all of them, as you can see. And I wanted to just demonstrate, what I find sometimes whenever I do this. Go ahead and get these loaded up in the case gauge. This is an EGW case gauge, so it does 7 cases at a time, and you can see that all of them fell in the holes on their own accord, except for one. It needs a little help, so I'll help it down there, but obviously this one here is not going to fall out. When you case gauge, whether it's a empty brass or a completed cartridge, the case should fall into the case gauge under its own power, just using gravity, and it should fall out, under its own accord as well. And all of them did except that one. So I need to help that out. I'm going to set those off to the side. Help this one out here. And again, this has been resized and deprimed, but if you can notice, and I don't know how well this will pick up on camera, but that case is cracked. It has a split right down the middle of it. And if I was reloading without performing this step, this case would have gone into my case feeder and it would have fed into my press. I would have resized it, deprime it, seated a primer in it, drop powder, seat a bullet, and then crimp it, and then I would case gauge it. And hopefully I would check it. Now, obviously when you have a completed round, that case has a little bit of help whenever you're case gauging it, because it's going to have the weight of the bullet, weight of the powder, and the weight of the primer helping it fall down into the slot. Whereas case gauging empty brass, it's kind of all or nothing. It's just the weight of the brass that's going to help it. So it makes it a lot easier to pick up on these types of defects. And obviously I won't load this. Now, if I were to load it in the previously mentioned process where, I don't check it, I don't case gauge it prior to, going through a reloading session, this case may or may not case gauge. This is not a perfect technique. I have found some of my reloads have split cases, and what I believe is happening there is whenever I seat a bullet, the tension that's created between the bullet and the brass is enough to push that brass to the point of failure. So it's definitely not perfect. However, as I mentioned, my defect rate is roughly 2 or 3 cases for every 1,000, and I'll take that. And anyway, this is why I case gauge prior to reloading. Is it necessary? It's not necessary. But if it's something you may want to look at and incorporate into your process, because I believe you will experience a much higher level of good product and reduce your number of defective products when it's all said and done. So, take a look at it. Hopefully it helps. Please leave some feedback. If there's anything I can do to improve this process, or if you guys have any ideas or thoughts on this, I would appreciate hearing them. So thanks for watching the video, guys, and happy reloading.